We've all been there before. You decide you're going to post regularly on social media, and then you look back a week later and you say, what the heck? Where are the sales? Where's the money that I thought I would be making by being active on social media? We're going to be talking about the one mistake you're making with your social media and why it's not generating any sales for your business on today's show. Hey, I'm Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast, and this is the podcast where we bring you the actionable, tangible things you need to know to be able to grow and scale your business. Now, before we dive into the podcast, we are going to jump over to a quick ad from one of the incredible businesses who sponsors the podcast. If you ever thought about advertising on the show, you can always reach out, Blake at goodadvicecoaching.com, or you can support the podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. And I so appreciate those of you who supported the podcast long term. All that to say, I'm excited to dive in today. We'll be right back soon.
Do you ever feel like your payment processor is robbing you blind? For some of us, it's not blind. We look at the amount of money that's going to our payment processor month after month, and a lot of times we ask ourselves, is there a better way? I'm making good money, yet so much of it isn't actually ending up in my pocket. In the world of payment processing, in many cases, it's a cashless world, so you have to have a payment processor you can really trust. I personally am a big fan of Brad Norwood, who's the owner of PrimePaymentsUSA.com. Brad's a business owner himself. He knows all the challenges that come with running a business. More importantly, he knows the value of an individual customer. See, some of these bigger businesses, they're all about scale. They're all about bringing in as many customers as possible. But do they know your name? Do they know your business? Do they know what's important to you? In many cases, the answer is no. And in worst cases, they're just looking to get as much money from every transaction that you work hard for, which really doesn't feel too good. So you got to reach out to Brad Norwood today and understand how he's doing business and why it can save you money month after month. More importantly, you might even ask him about his zero-fee payment processing that he's offering to a select few of people. Go to PrimePaymentsUSA.com and start putting the money that you worked hard for back into your pocket.
All right, I apologize today. I'm still getting over a little bit of a cold. So a little bit of a raspiness, a little bit of a depth to the voice today as I try to power through and talk about this podcast episode that I'm excited to dive into today. This is an episode that's coming up because of a conversation I had with a customer earlier this week. And it was the conversation wasn't, I was about to say it was so profound. The conversation wasn't profound, which sounds like I'm just stroking my own ego. This light bulb moment went off with this customer that I realized this is something that I need to talk about in a bigger conversation on the podcast. So I had this customer I was working with, and we were talking about their sales pipeline, what they're doing to generate sales for their business. And this customer in particular said, I'm really not seeing the fruit of the work I'm putting in, all of the effort that I'm putting in. I'm not seeing an ROI of actual sales in my pocket. So I said, well, talk to me a little bit about what are you doing to generate sales? And he said, oh, well, I'm making sure that I post on social media every day. I'm engaging with comments. I'm liking different things, liking as in clicking the like button on different, pictures and pieces of content that people were doing. And I was waiting. I thought this was the start of a conversation. And he goes, yeah. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. And I go, okay, well, that's brand. What are you doing for sales? And he looked at me with this look of almost kind of I just told you. So I was like, okay, I see what's happening here. I see the problem of why you're not seeing momentum with your business. And this led to a conversation of explaining the difference between branding and sales. And we might touch on that a little bit today in our conversation, but I think it's very important to understand that to be able to make it long-term in your business, you have to have the means of generating sales for your business. You have to have an intentional effort that you are doing that brings people to your website, that gets people to pick up the phone and call you, that causes people to want to come to your store or come to your shop or investigate your services a little bit more. These are all things that we call this sales. It's the things that puts the actual money in your pocket. And what I have found, especially for businesses that have digital brands, is that many of us confuse sales with social media. And you have to understand that these two things are not the same. They're not the same. Sales is not social media, and social media is not sales. And if you have been, let's say you've been struggling to make ends meet, and your answer to that has been, I'm going to post every day on social media, I'm going to let you know that you're heading towards a destination of frustration and wondering why you're not seeing a meaningful impact on your business. Now, understand for a second, I'm not saying today that social media can't drive sales. I'm not saying that social media is not effective for sales. There are many examples, endless examples of companies that put out a viral post. They don't know it's going to be viral, but I think of one that was really popular in the last few months was, I'm going to butcher this example, but it was basically this guy who was falling on like a water spigot. And as this is happening, the camera cuts to the company creating the social media piece. And it cuts to like a car salesman who's like falling back into his chair and he spits water out of his mouth. So to clarify this, it's two different videos. The first one is a guy falling on a water spigot where you're like, ooh, that's not going to feel good. And then it immediately, as the fall happens, it cuts to the car salesperson who lands in his chair, spits out water, and says, if you've been thinking about a vehicle, come to, Landers Toyota. I don't know. But it's funny. It's funny because you're like, there's a bit of a hook there of like, what's going to happen to the guy who falls on the spigot? And it's just clever. It's clever marketing. Well, this trend went pretty viral. In fact, many other businesses started doing something like this. It's actually, I think since then has kind of died off as many, flash in the pan trends can do. But very much so, that business went viral and got incredible attention and no doubt got some sales from that content. So hear what I'm saying in that I'm not saying that social media cannot move the needle for your business. I'm not saying that it won't generate you any revenue. Excuse me, goodness. I'm not saying that it won't generate you any revenue. What I am saying is that it alone is not a sales mechanism for your business. And until you understand this, you will wonder why you seem to be putting in so much work and time and effort into content without seeing your business taking off from a revenue perspective. Now, again, there's been many times where I think about, I put up a post about podcasting just a few weeks ago, and I put it up at like 4:30 in the afternoon, and I literally got a phone call 5 minutes later from someone who saw it. They said, hey, I want to get some help with the podcast. The money changed hands. Boom, deal was done. And that came from someone seeing a post that I made on social media. So it works. It does work. However, understand that social media is not sales. It's brand. It's branding for your business. They are touch points that allow someone to perhaps get to know you better, get to know your business better, understand the kind of business that you do, or maybe even learn a little bit more about why your service is so important. A really good example of this would be, there's a guy named Sai, I can't think of his last name, but he's a home inspector, and he does a home inspection series on YouTube where he points out all of the mistakes that new builders make in building homes. So he'll like go up in the attic, and it's a brand new building. It's a new home, a new construction home. So the bias that many of us would have would be thinking that the house is perfect, that it looks great, that there wouldn't be any issues with it. But what Sai does is he'll go up to the attic and show the number of trusses and beams and things that are broken and shattered, and like where insulation was never put down, all these mistakes that are made. And part of the value that comes from this channel is it informs you then why a good home inspector is so important. It helps you understand the service a little bit better. So social media can do many things for your business, including bringing you new customers. But it's not on its own the sales mechanism for your business. Many people, when they go into business, they don't know what they should be doing to find their next customer. So what do? They do the thing that is most tangible. It's the low-hanging fruit. They've seen other businesses post on social media, so they create a social media account, and they spend much of their time putting posts up and engaging with other people's content. And it's not a bad idea. It's just that when you run a business, the path to your first sale can often be so long. It can take time to make money from your first customer. Many of us don't have the cash flow or just the savings to be able to make it that long in business. So here's what I'm getting at. Instead of seeing social media as your sales strategy for your business, what you need to do is create an actual sales strategy, an actual sales plan for how you will, 1, engage with your customers, and 2, offer your services to your customers. And this can be any number of things. This can be networking events where ideally your customer is present. If you go to a networking event and your customer is not there, you're just going to like a glorified adult meet and greet. I say this because I had a friend of mine who he sold a service to web developers, and he was wanting to go to one of our local networking events. And he was like, "Do you think it'd be good for me to go?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, I don't know how many web developers are there. It seems like there might be another event or a different event that might be a better use of your time." So networking is one example. Cold calling is another example. And that doesn't have to be just cold calling like in person. It can be online. In fact, there's a book called Traction. See if we can find this for you real quick. So we can find, here we go. Here we go. Traction actually talks about a number of ways that you can reach your customer. And there's the options are bigger than you think in terms of ways you can get people to engage with you. And they all operate in different speeds. So one of them would be paid advertising, digital ads. You pay Google to put your business at the top of a search result list. This has often a very immediate result. However, it is expensive. You may not have the cash for it. On the contrary, SEO is a long game for getting people to buy from you. You're putting content on your website. You're telling Google what your business is about so that when someone searches for you, and as you build authority in that space, Google will send people to you. And there's a bunch of other I don't want to say less known, but they don't always come to the top of someone's mind in terms of ways to reach people. Affiliate marketing is one example where you find people who'd be willing to try and use your product and then talk about it. Trade shows, if you're selling something that would make sense to actually bring to an event. Trade shows, if you're selling a service, you might like your own expertise. You might go to like a speaking engagement where you're like the expert on a topic. You can offer to guest write for a publication or for a blog or for a website. There's email marketing. There is, oh my gosh, man, there's so many options for how you can drive interest to your business that is just beyond posting occasionally on social media. I say this because I think sometimes people get frustrated at social media, not understanding its usefulness. Social media is great for building your tribe and your community. I post on social media actively. It's really LinkedIn, and then it gets reposted to a bunch of different other platforms. But I post actively because I want people to know my values and how I see business, and to glean for themselves some value for how they can do business. But if my business was, and by the way, another example of how you can drive revenue to your business would be like a podcast, even too. But even with podcasting, I think people have the same problem with podcasting that they have with social media, in that someone posts, they're like, I'm going to do a podcast. And I hear this all the time, by the way, just because it's such a, everyone has a podcast nowadays. So the people who don't have one are like, well, maybe I should have a podcast. Which, by the way, I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, who's also in the podcasting space. And he was like, honestly, a lot of people thinking about starting a podcast would be better served just being guests on podcast. Which, by the way, as a podcaster, you'd be surprised. Now, nowadays, I have to be a little bit more selective just because the podcast, I have such like I've had so many guests on the show at this point. But I know at least back in the day, I mean, literally anyone who asked, I was like, yeah, sure, come on. You want to come on more than once? You want to come on a few times? But definitely for certain people, they'd be better served just being a guest on a podcast than they would be, starting their own podcast. But I see and hear this all the time. Someone says, I'm going to do a podcast. They post one episode, and then they're like, well, what happened? Why didn't this thing take off? Like, I thought I was going to have tens of thousands of listeners. And these people are suffering from the field of dreams effect of believing that if I build it, they will come. And that is simply not how business works. Whenever you decide to do a podcast, you are committing to a long-term branding strategy for your business, just like with social media. So you're not going to see sales come in after your first episode or your second episode or your third episode, and probably not even by your 10th episode, unless you already have a really meaningful audience, a meaningful tribe that is listening to the show that you had already built elsewhere. Excuse me. So whenever you're frustrated that some of these things aren't working, you should ask yourself, do I have the right understanding of what this is and how it works for my business and what this actually looks like for my business? If I go into podcasting, and my favorite customers in the podcasting space, when we have a conversation and they're like, yeah, I'm going to commit to this for 3 years. Like, those are my favorite kinds of customers, because this is someone who understands the value of committing to something long-term, iterating on it, innovating it, building your tribe around it, and then looking for ways you can monetize it. And I don't mean that in a sketchy way, but monetizing your expertise, monetizing the value that you're bringing to other people. So I love people who have that long-term perspective. When someone comes to me and they say, hey, I want to start a podcast, I usually ask, are you gonna do this for at least a year? And if they say like, well, I thought I'd maybe try like 5 or 6 episodes, try it for what? What do you think's going to happen in 5 or 6 episodes? You're not going to make any money on it. Your business isn't going to blow up in a positive way on it. In fact, almost nothing's going to happen on it, because not only is 5 or 6 episodes not enough to move the needle, but everyone else and their mom is starting a podcast. So until you're willing to do it long-term and show that there's actual long-term value there, people aren't going to listen to it either. So all that to say, if you're trying to generate sales for your business, you'd be much better off, much better served actually doing direct sales avenues for your business. Not branding things, not things that bring awareness to your business, but actually going to where your customer is and trying to sell them on your service, or creating the pathway for them to find you, like direct ads, SEO. And again, there's so many options for how you can do this. And also just I think not even so much like advertising. The woman who started Bumble, she told the story about how they went to on college campuses, and they went around to all like the sororities and fraternities and were like, "Hey, will you use this app?" And what they actually did, I think the story, if I remember it correctly, they'd go to one sorority and be like, "Yeah, we just came from this fraternity. They're all going to use it." So, and they'd be like, "Well, I want to get on it." And then they go to the next one and be like, "Yeah, this sorority, they said they're going to use it." So, there's lots of ways that you can generate direct sales for your business that is not just social media. And I think really on this, I would just say, to be a successful business owner long term, actually muted my mic that time as I was coughing. To be a successful business owner long term, you have to be creative. You have to think outside the box. You can't just do what everyone's doing. Oh, I got to get a website. Oh, I have to be on social media. Yes, these things are incredibly valuable, but do you really think you're going to make it long term just doing what everyone else is doing? You got to think outside the box and be willing to try things in a different way and get a little clever about how you run your business. There are people who they launch a business and it just works. They post on social media and it just takes off. They announce their brand and people just show up to buy. You can know that's the exception, not the norm. It's the exception, not the rule. So bearing that in mind, be a little clever, and more importantly, be intentional about how you're going to generate sales for your business. So going back to this customer I was talking to earlier this week, who he said, I'm not really seeing any sales momentum for my business. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm posting on social media. I said, okay, well then you have not done anything in the sales world for your business yet. So until you do that, until you engage in that way, you're not going to see meaningful growth for your business. Don't make this mistake hoping that one day you're going to hit an inflection point where it's going to start making you lots of money for your business. I have been doing social media, podcasting, LinkedIn for 6 years. I've been doing LinkedIn pretty actively for, I guess, about maybe a year or two. The sales do come in, but they're few and far between. And if that was my only means of making it in business, it isn't enough. It's not enough. So keep that in mind as you think about your success and think about what you're doing to grow your brand. Hey, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed today's podcast and you're not subscribed to the podcast, what the heck are you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button. And don't forget, if you enjoy the podcast, drop us a 5-star review and let us know what you thought about the show. Or if you don't like the podcast, maybe don't leave a review, I guess. All that to say, I appreciate you listening. I appreciate those of you who've supported the podcast long term. That's today's good advice. We'll see you later. Take care.